Welcome back to the scientific writing class, and today it's again grammar time, more English grammar, and the specific topics today will be tenses and the use of the active and passive voice in your writing. So I'm going to go through the various sections of the paper, and I'm suggesting to you which tense you should use under which circumstances. Okay? So, introduction. First of all, these are the rules. Use the present tense for well-established evidence. So here's two examples. A research paper communicates scientific work to a wide audience. Climate change is affecting ecosystems. So use the present tense for this established evidence. A good example that I always like to use and mention here is stars are bright. So you use the present tense for this. Then you use the past tense if you refer to other studies. So the authors X, Y, Z showed that. So you see this is already getting complicated because almost you have to think about every sentence which tense you use here. But these, first of all, should be simply easy. So for the introduction then, the rule is use past tense when citing others, and present tense if you refer to common sense knowledge. As I mentioned to you before, stars are bright. Okay, so this is the introduction section. The method section, I haven't even included a slide yet because it's so easy. The method section, you use the past tense throughout. This is one of the easiest sections. Then we move to the results section. And here the rules are the following. Use the present tense to explain the results. For example, the results show that. Use the past tense to summarize. We found that. And now to make it more confusing, when referring to figures and tables, use the present tense. For example, figure 1 shows the distribution of. So again, you have the mixing of present tense and past tense in your results section, but these are simple rules that you can apply to your writing. And actually it helps if you have some of the sentences already kind of pre-manufactured. There's lots of guidelines online also which sentences you could use, and you just have to add your more material. So I advise you to look at some of these sentences as well. I gave you some here. We found that figure 1 shows and so on. This slide displays how you should use the tenses in your discussion and conclusion section. So sometimes the discussion and the conclusion are in one section, but here I have divided also the conclusions into the conclusions. So in the discussion section, when you talk about your study results, you use the past tense. When relating it with other research, you use the present tense, and there's an example given of a sentence that you could use, such as this is in line with researcher XY who found that. So in that sentence you have the mixing of past and present tense. And in general, use the present tense for well-established research evidence, past tense for single studies. So again, the example of well-established research evidence, climate change is a threat for ecosystems, or stars are bright. In the conclusion section, you use the present tense and or conditional tense. Our study contributes to, present tense, our findings may inform interventions. In the conclusions, you can also report limitations. Here you use the past tense, and you could use wordings like our study also had some limitations, such as future studies should address the limitations to our study. For example, we use cross-sectional data. So I use past tense. And here's the summary of the use of tenses. Most important is be consistent with the tenses. So go through your paper again and again and see what you have used and change it. So the convention 1 is the one that I like, and that the one is commonly used. You should use this one. So state the established knowledge and making reference to tables and figures in present tense. Describe methods and results of one's own research as well as the recent findings in past tense. And the convention 2, I've written it down here. This is using present tense throughout the article, but I do not recommend that you use this one. It's not common. In general, you should avoid to use future and present progressive tenses. This is these ing forms, try to avoid them. So use convention 1, and again, most important, just be consistent with the tenses. Don't place them all over. Here's a good online library where you can check your tenses if your English tense is formulated correctly. This is a tense chart, and you can see all the various ways of tenses in English. For example, simple past, past continuous, past perfect. So these are all past, whereas these are all present. And this you can look if you have made the choice of your word correctly here using this tense chart. Now we are coming to the next topic that is very interesting because it has historically kind of changed. This is the topic on active and passive voice. So what is active and passive voice? If you use the first person, this is called the active voice. You describe what you did and why. So if I put my verb as I or we, this is the active voice. And in the past, often this has not been used a lot, probably because people thought it was more objective to use the third person. But now it is very much asked that you use the active voice, and actually most journals or many journals already asked you to convert into this direct language, such as science and nature. And here's two examples that I would like to show you how a sentence is written in the active and the passive voice. So you see here the example for the passive voice. So data for the supply chain has been collected, reaching back 3 decades, and so on and so on. So has been collected is passively stated. You don't know who collected it, so it's basically anonymous. And changing it to the active voice would be putting this verb into action and saying here who collected the data. So I or we have collected data for the supply chain, reaching back 3 decades, and so on. So in this lower case, you see the active voice, and this is what we would like to read. In most cases, there's again, of course, exemptions to this rule, but try to use the active voice as much as possible. So again, here a summary of the active and passive voice. Use active form as much as possible. The active form allows readers to differentiate between author's work and research performed by others. It makes it way more personal. Use passive if the sentence focuses on the object or if it is not important or unknown who did the action. So this is one exemption of the rule. And also be careful. A mix of active and passive voice almost can create ambiguity as to whose methodology or results the authors are referring to. So be careful when you use active or when you mix active and passive voice. I think if you write your thesis with a more active voice, you will also show the great accumulation of knowledge you have done there and the work that you've been doing. So try to formulate it actively.